Joy, peace, tranquility, all of these things are a transmutative effect from lower negative emotions to the higher. So I've been getting a lot of questions recently about sobriety, particularly in the context of alcohol and what young men or older men can do to remove the addictive behaviors in their lives and move towards sobriety, and why they should do this. I think it's first important for me to preface that I truly don't see any utility in intoxication, especially earlier on in your lives, which is ironically the portion of your life where you'll likely come into contact with substances like alcohol and any kind of paraphernalia. What I mean by that is the utility that some of these substances serve is purely from a perspective of pleasure and entertainment. And I'm not saying that pleasure and entertainment do not have their place, but similarly to the reference point of things like pornography and that pleasure-seeking system that you have in your brain, what Freud called the id, you know, the thing that always wants pleasure. It's all about feeling good. Our culture is geared and oriented towards and to serve those particular drives. So similarly, you can place that particular frame of reference on top of that pursuit of getting wasted, getting drunk, and going out. And it's funny how, you know, there's this idea of the gateway drug that one leads to another. When you typically drink, the ultimate purpose behind that is usually chasing tail. Is usually chasing women as a consequence of going out to a pub or a bar to ultimately end up hooking up with someone and having a one-night stand. So they begin to roll into one another. For the men that are experiencing addiction to alcohol especially, I would say that that is a projection from some part of you that is lacking, that you must substitute in a way to usually escape things like pain, depression, and some of the more negative emotions that currently occupy your emotional state of being. Now, this has a masking effect typically, and though I will concede I do not have too much personal experience in the grips of alcohol, alcohol has been one of those things that I really am indifferent towards. In fact, I probably haven't drunk alcohol in well over a year or 2 years. And it's not something that occupies a large portion of my attention. That being said, I think there is a tendency to lean towards those particular substances when one is, like I say, emotionally compromised, and that is those are emotions that I typically don't suffer too much with, especially more recently. It used to be something that I didn't have too much control over, but since applying and integrating reflective practices into my life, negative emotion is something that truly doesn't have a hold over me as much as it did prior to those practices being in place. And it may sound like I'm speaking like a broken record when I say, you know, where are your reflective practices in your life that are giving you poise, that are giving you composure, that are finding your center? And you will not be able to view your emotional conflicts from a point of objectivity without those reflective practices. So I've used that term several times now. What do I mean? Well, first and foremost, the easiest one to do is journaling. Journaling is an active dialogue between, let's say, what you perceive to be yourself and your body and your mind. Now that is a curious way of framing that. What I'm trying to convey here, and what the prior knowledge is to understanding that particular analogy, is that many people believe they are their thoughts, they believe they are their emotions, and that is where the grips of alcoholism and any kind of addictive tendency has its claws very deep into you. The difficulty is seeing those thoughts, those emotions, as a separate entity unto the self. The self is something which Jung coined, I believe, perhaps some of his predecessors, but the self has many different names, and those of you who are familiar with my references to the self will also be familiar with this idea of the Atman in Hinduism, the Pneuma in Greek, the soul. Whatever analogy best pleases you, use that. Now, whether or not you believe in those, let's call them esoteric ideas, you cannot deny the presence of the witness when you more frequently sit in practices like meditation. Meditation is a tool that allows you to see, just like I have said, your thoughts and your emotions as a ongoing process that you can watch happen in front of you and create more space in between the viewing of those particular processes. When you experience this in meditation, and it doesn't just need to be meditation, I use meditation very generally, but meditation can be used in, you know, walking, in journaling, in any process where you are present enough to see the disturbance or the processes of your thoughts and emotions as, again, as a separate entity unto itself. The more frequently you sit with this experience, the more you will know that you do not identify with the more common thoughts of anxiety, depression, stress, and many of the things that you try and occupy or mask with paraphernalia, alcohol, any other substance. That is an act of suppression or repression on that particular energy that is manifesting itself in you. It is rooted in some fear. Ultimately, most negative emotions are rooted in fear. To look at them objectively and not do those self-reflective practices, it is alarming to realize how many people are afraid of being alone, afraid of taking time to do those practices, to sit with their thoughts. And again, this is hard for me to jump into that particular space, because being alone is often one of my favorite times of the day to sit and do that deep work. But many people try and fill that void, that space where you can better hear your internal dialogue with alcohol, with friends. And I'm sure many of you may identify with this, or know people in your day-to-day who exhibit these exact emotions. You all know people that hate being alone, that always need to be the center of attention, that always need the next thing to fill that particular space. And that is where 99% of people's neuroticism, and then as a consequence addictive tendencies, start to germinate. So I know I'm going off many different tangents here, but it's a thought experiment that many people don't take the time to do. Thinking, again, is another process that you cannot multitask and do. It's really curious. Ask yourself, when's the last time you took 15 minutes out of your day to sit in a room without your phone, without your devices, without your screens, and just think deeply. Use this mechanism consciously, not unconsciously. Don't allow those thoughts to just appear, very abstractly, non-tangibly. Consciously control this tool and use it to discriminate against the particular emotions that and thoughts that arise in you, and then you'll quickly get to the root cause of that particular neuroticism. And then when you do that, you can start doing very powerful self-reflective practices. Other important people I would note here are people like David Hawkins. Wonderful, wonderful work about mapping the unconscious, allowing emotions to happen objectively. Missing the word here. Consult them, or view them, or witness them without, again, putting your subjectivity on it, without getting angry at the fact that you're fearful, without getting angry at the fact you're depressed, and feeding it and feeding it and feeding it, but allowing it to be, allowing the course of whatever energy needs to be there, dissipating it, and then bringing that energy up to higher levels of consciousness. Then you get into courage, then you get into joy, peace, tranquility. All of these things are a transmutative effect from lower negative emotions to the higher. That's how you bring it up. So brothers, I hope for those of you that maybe are having some challenges with sobriety, this lends you some kind of perspective that this is really the same trials and tribulations we all have, just with a different skin on. And from the perspective of someone who's been sober for, I mean, it's hard for me to really comment on, because I can't draw back to those particular reference points of where I was so clouded. You become more clear. The benefits in which you can be more sensitive to natural sources of dopamine is probably the most incredible thing that I constantly and consistently experience as a consequence of my sobriety. So no longer am I getting those huge influxes of dopamine from nefarious external substances like alcohol, like weed, like any kind of, again, paraphernalia. Instead, it's all coming from really natural reserves, like having a conversation with my partner, or having a conversation with my friends, or playing sport, or going to the gym, or exercising. All of these things bring me so much joy, because my dopamine neurochemistry isn't completely out of whack with these external substances. So I'm very sensitive to things like walking in the park. It brings me more joy because I have not corrupted my system. So I know this was perhaps a little bit of a convoluted and messy dialogue about sobriety, but I hope, again, for men that are having trouble with this particular challenge in their life and who are looking towards the path of sobriety as some kind of salvation, it does take a lot of work, but please remember, as a fundamental principle, this all comes at the consequence of self-reflective practices that allow you to change your perspective to the energies that are rising inside of you. And once you get behind it, game over. Brothers, if you subscribe to this video, subscribe to me, and I'll bring you something soon, very. So brothers, if you subscribe to anything of what I've said here, then you can subscribe to me, and I'll bring you something very soon.